Okay, welcome to Peeling Syd Barrett. This will be episode 39, and it's been a long run. This will be my last episode where I discuss the music and art of Mr. Barrett directly and consider contextual elements that tie in with those. And I'd like to thank you if you've gone through the whole series with me, or if you've done that later. Hopefully, it's given you something of value, and hopefully, it's something that you've enjoyed. So, in this episode, what I would like to do is tear apart the song Baby Lemonade. And I've kept this one kind of on the shelf for a while because it's a little bit of a vexing song for me to try and figure out. So, let's give a couple facts about Baby Lemonade real quick. It is recorded in February of 1970 and released in November of 1970 on the Barrett album. And the Barrett album, I haven't really discussed this much, but of course, Mr. Barrett would go on to sign all of his paintings Barrett, or the ones that he wanted to sign, he would sign Barrett. Now, this is significant, in my opinion, because someone like Vincent van Gogh deliberately signed with his first name, Vincent, and that is because he's trying to relate to people on a certain level, a very personal level. Mr. Barrett, however, is signing with his last name, which is a form almost of like a formal distancing from people, and you would have to, at least I would have to assume that's because he wanted to maintain a form of distance between himself and the people that perhaps would be checking out his artwork. And if you've been following along with this series, I think you can see why that may be the case. At any rate, the album Barrett may be a complete piece of art or a complete artwork, and we've tried to tie certain visual as well as musical elements together in the past, and I'm going to try to do so here as well a little bit later in this episode. So normally what we do, or what I'd like to do, is mention corrections and messages, and I don't have a whole lot of corrections. I will say that I've gone through some of the lyrics from previous episodes, and I've seen more poetic alliteration and interesting combinations of words that are quite wonderful. But to call them out would, take a very, very long time, and you can do that on your own. Really, it just is something that takes some effort and is rewarding to people that like to do so. And I won't pretend like I've caught all of the interesting combinations in my reviews. I feel my reviews have been quite superficial, actually. So I'm sure I'm missing a lot. And if there are people that are more poetically minded, more art minded, that can take the kind of cues that I kind of threw out there and review them and kind of think about them and tie things together later, then that'll be wonderful. That's kind of something that I'm hoping will possibly happen. At any rate, we did have a message. I believe it's from a Mr. Chapman, and I'll put his message up here. And he mentions that he thinks that the previous episode that we just did about Milky Way was kind of perhaps Mr. Barrett expressing the idea of being torn between reality and unreality, and perhaps that's tied to a mental condition or something else. And thank you for your message, and thank you for providing your comment and your feedback in relatively positive fashion. I will say that, of course, a lot of people would agree with that statement. My feelings personally are that it's certainly possible. That's been covered by a lot of people, or that idea or that angle has been covered a lot by other people. So I've tried not to go into it too much. Again, it's very difficult to know the mental state of someone. All we can really do is kind of tear apart what work that they've done. And in particular in Mr. Barrett's case, because there's never been a review that was made known to the public, So it's kind of hard to know exactly where his mental condition was. All we know is what his interviews were, what his music is, what his art is, and then we get secondhand reports from people that knew him. But if you just checked out the last episode with Iggy and Milky Way, it does appear that she felt he was quite coherent, and in fact, quite a manipulator. A manipulator is her word, not mine. So you can read into that as you like. Of course, we all see things through our own lens, in our own way. We interpret everything that we interact with, and that includes art, the way that we look at it. It's very difficult to try to understand another person unless you have something in common with that person that perhaps allows you to connect what may be relayed, especially when that person's speaking in metaphor. So, in a way, like I said, of course, this happens all the time in art. People look at a piece of art or a painting and they're trying to interpret what the meaning might be. But quite often you learn more about the person looking at it than you do about the painting itself, because it can be interpreted in so many different ways. And I do feel in many ways that that's true with Mr. Barrett, that he can be interpreted in many, many ways. So I'm hopefully not overly coloring people's perceptions of things. All I want to do is make sure that people understand that there's more than one way of looking at things, and there is more than one possible interpretation of a number of things that Mr. Barrett has made. You look at a song like Effervescing Elephant, which many people interpret one way, but if you go back and watch that episode and you're up for it, I think you'll agree that it's quite complex. And if you go back and look at the, I believe it was episode 4, Peeling Syd Barrett, The Boy and the Lion, that's kind of where I began to realize that Mr. Barrett was extremely complex, and that he was capable of relaying things symbolically with this kind of total visual element that ties in with a lot of his other songs, and with some of his personal history. And of course, perhaps I'm missing on some of it, but I think there are some things that are understandable about him. So that's what this is kind of about. So without further ado, let's go ahead then and let's take a look at the song Baby Lemonade. Now, I'm just going to mention here, I'm not going to get into it too much. I'll get into it here in a little bit. The title is very strange, Baby Lemonade, okay? And that has vexed me for quite some time because of the various things that are possible there. And if you tear this down with abbreviations and Cockney slang and previous work, which is what I plan to do later on, then you'll see that it can have quite a few possible connotations. But let's just stick to the lyrics themselves. Now, first off, the intro to the song was supposedly recorded by Mr. Gilmore, and was not actually played by Mr. Gilmore. That's Mr. Barrett warming up on guitar, and he's quite capable. Now, this is noted within Mr. Palacios's book, Within the Dark Globe, on page 365. Supposedly that fact is verified, that is Mr. Barrett on guitar warming up. And quite adroit, I would add, for someone who supposedly is not entirely altogether there. So let's kind of run through the lyrics here. There's a sad town with cold iron hands. Okay, so a sad town, I don't know what a sad town could be. A sad place. It could be a reference, of course, to Cambridge. Mr. Barrett is from Cambridge, and he did regularly go back to Cambridge. He could also be referencing London in a way, although London wouldn't be considered a town. But perhaps it's a bit of irony in a way. Cold iron hands. Now, cold iron hands. Now, if you'll notice, now there's a lot of D and T alliteration here. Sad town, cold hands. And there's the S on the sad and the hands. Now, the next line is clap a party of clowns outside. So we continue with the TSD alliteration. I will mention, of course, that that cold iron hands might not be clapping. What may be happening, of course, is that cold iron hands could be a reference to a clock. Because, of course, clocks also have hands, and they can be cold in that they really don't care. They just continue on. So this may be a reference to a sad town, and time is passing coldly, and there's a party of clowns outside. Now, in our previous episodes, We've discussed the possibility of clowns being a reference to rural people as Shakespeare used it. It could also be a reference, of course, to children. Children are often referred to as clowns because they smile easily. And we also have mentioned that Bob Dylan, of course, mentions the jugglers and the clowns in his own lyrics. So perhaps this is borrowed from Dylan. It's hard to say. The next line is a wonderful line. Rain falls in gray far away. So we have the long A sound, rain, gray, far away. And it's, I don't know, it's kind of a wonderful visual imagery, honestly. Then comes the Please, Please, Baby Lemonade. So this is requesting Please, Please, Baby Lemonade. So why Baby Lemonade? I don't know. But let's continue on. There's a mention of the evening, and then the sun is going down, which makes sense, of course. And then the earth streams in the morning. So overnight, and then a cage is sent through a post. What all that could mean, I don't entirely know. These lyrics are, of course, very odd, and Mr. Barrett seems to be kind of piecing together imagery and ideas loosely, as he is wont to do quite often. The next line is significant for me because he says, "Make your name like a ghost." Now this is significant, of course, because it is very, very similar to John Keats and his gravestone. Here lies one whose name was writ in water. So this is the same imagery, but used with different words, as Mr. Barrett did in the song Word Song. And we noted that there are quite a few songs that seem to be referenced in the song Word Song. So if you go through and you pull like lines of maybe 3 or 4 lines, for example, Poppy and Rubber, of course, there's a reference to rubber bands in I believe it's Birdie Hop. I'll put that song up here. But also Car, Distant, and Opal. And we have just certain ideas that raindrops, pattering, etc. Eaters, Jaws, Jungle, that seems to be a reference to Effervescing Elephant. Liquids and Neon seems to be tied to Terrapin. So we have these ideas that are captured within certain songs, and here is one in this case in Baby Lemonade. Make your name like a ghost, which seems to be referencing Keats. Now, we'll finish this discussion with a poem by Keats, and hopefully that will be enjoyable. But Keats may be someone that was quite important to Mr. Barrett. Again, the line, "Please, please, baby lemonade." The next line is that he's screaming and he met you this way. Okay, so he's met someone like this, and then he mentions that they're nice like ice. So in other words, this person is a very cold person. Now here is a line that ties in with our previous line about cold iron hands. The next line says that there's a clock that was sent through a washing machine. An interesting double rotation. So of course a washing machine rotates, as does a clock. So wheels within wheels, I don't know. Perhaps a twisting of time, or perhaps a hope that time will change. And then a mention of being alone. So come around, make it soon, and then so alone. Now from this point on, now there's some very simple alliteration happening there. I won't go through all of it, but I will kind of now try to break down this idea of lemonade. So this idea, please, please, baby lemonade. So there's all this grayness and darkness and loneliness that's being expressed within this song. The sun has gone down. Why has the sun gone down and the earth is streaming in the morning? That seems to be a variation in time. I will point out something that I kind of missed previously, that the idea of the sun shining on you, of course, could be the reference to a popular view of a person going down, or their moment in the sun kind of going away. And of course, this is kind of what's happening with Mr. Barrett as he kind of slinks away towards the end of this. It is difficult to know if that's exactly what he wanted to do, but the idea of the sun going down of course, is very, very similar to Dark Side of the Moon. And I broke down, did Dark Side of the Moon quite extensively. I did miss this in this song, Run, Rabbit, Run, Dig That Hole, Forget the Sun. I just want to point out, and I'll go through this again in the Did Syd series when I do the wall, but Barrett, B-A-R-R-E-T, is, of course, containing the same letters as rabbit. So I believe that's called an anagram. And the rabbit digging a hole and forgetting the sun would be very similar to this idea of the sun going down on someone, and would again possibly be an influence of Mr. Barrett. So let's go ahead then and move on. Now I've kind of made enough notes on this song. I just want to point out the title, and this is an important title. What could be meant by Please Baby Lemonade? Now this is a kind of extensive one. I'm going to run through a whole bunch of possibilities. Now I just want to point out that lemonade could reference a number of things, of course. It's been used colloquially in slang for a number of terms. One of them is a form of an opiate called hydrocodone, I believe it's called. So liquid hydrocodone has a slang usage of lemonade. Now, I don't know when exactly that was available. Hydrocodone is a very old drug. It was, I believe, invented around the 1920s, but not necessarily in liquid form. So it was in pill form. So in that case, it possibly wouldn't be that. We've mentioned that this could be a reference to the sun. So, of course, lemonade could be a reference to sunshine in some ways. Another possible slang use is that making lemonade has been colloquially used in slang to mean intercourse. So this could, of course, also be a reference to intercourse. And we've mentioned that Mr. Barrett has previously made what we would consider to be sexual metaphor within his song. Now, of course, also lemonade could also be referenced to something like urine, which is also a somewhat vulgar slang usage. So I don't know if any of those is necessarily going on, but they definitely are each possible in a certain way. You'll have to decide if you think any of that is happening, if that's being coded in here. I just will point out that, of course, aid, the end of lemonade, so this could be two words kind of put together, not just baby lemonade, but lemon aid, A-I-D. So if it is lemonade, that would be help. So please help, which seems to be in line with the general theme of the song. So what would lemon be? Well, we've gone through and we've discussed the many references to blonde, and of course lemons are yellow, and of course lemon begins with the letter L, and that may be a clue as to a person. And I won't get into all of that here, but if you're familiar with Mr. Barrett's story, you may recognize that as a possible person in his own personal life, and so he may actually be asking this person to come for a visit and help for some reason. So, quite poetically done, honestly, if I have to say so in my own way. I think it's quite poetically done. Now, we mentioned that there are quite a few, and that's pretty much it for the song conversation. I would like to discuss some context to this because, as we mentioned, Mr. Barrett likes to tear apart things and put them back together again in a different way, and he may be doing that again here. There is a song that this reminds me of quite a bit, and that is the Lemon Song by Led Zeppelin, which is a very strange song. Of course, most people know the Lemon Song. It's because it's somewhat difficult to know exactly what's going on there. But there is a history to the Lemon Song, and there are a number of influences to the Lemon Song itself, and you can look these up if you so choose. Now, the general outline of the song is formatted on a song called The Killing Floor by Howlin Wolf. We have previously mentioned that Mr. Barrett specifically was interested in Howlin' Wolf. That is shown on page 23 of the Barrett book. And in that photo, he is shown to be pointing his guitar at Howlin' Wolf. That is on page 23. This is again the book by Russell Beecher and Will Schutz, so I'll give you all the information here. They do specifically note that he is pointing to Howlin' Wolf. Now, this is a little bit of an odd connection, of course, because Jimi Hendrix was playing with this song for quite some time. And if you're familiar with Jimi Hendrix at all, you know not only did he tour with Pink Floyd and with Syd Barrett, but he also had been already toying with this song, Howlin' Wolf, The Killing Floor. Now, this is used as the basis for Led Zeppelin later. And we also have noted previously, or at least I did, in Did Syd Barrett Led Zeppelin 4, that there do appear to be some interesting coincidences, I guess you could say, between Mr. Barrett and Led Zeppelin. So why is Led Zeppelin kind of using The Killing Floor, but adding this idea of squeezing a lemon? Well, there is an old song by Art Mckay called She Squeezed My Lemon, and the innuendo there is quite obvious. Of course, you have to wonder about, the visual nature of the shape of a lemon, not necessarily matching. But I will say, of course, that there is an organ that could be variously sized between a walnut to a lemon that could be being referenced here. And I'll leave that up to you to discern or figure out on your own. But that innuendo or that metaphor may be consistent. So who has taken this kind of idea of the lyrics of Art Mckay and tied them together with The Killing Floor by Howlin' Wolf? Well, gee, I don't know. You'll have to kind of decide that on your own, but is something like that happening in a very preemptive here's, of course, the date of Lemon Song by Zeppelin. I'll put it up here on the screen. But is that connection being utilized here to some degree? Is it being pointed at within this song, Baby Lemonade, which Mr. Barrett released in November of 1970? And is it being kind of reworded, reformed, and eventually re-released in a new type of a song by Led Zeppelin that's tying together these two various influences of Jimi Hendrix and Art Mckay and Howlin' Wolf? You'll have to decide on your own. I'll leave that up to you. So, I suppose I would like to run through a few other things that are, I guess you could say, somewhat related as contextual elements. One is within the same book by Barrett is a I guess it's a still life with lemons. It's difficult to tell exactly what they are. It's on page 238, and I'll kind of give a picture of it here. Now, there is a reference to this in Mr. Chapman's book. He mentions Still Life with Lemons. I don't know that that is something as a title that Mr. Barrett would have created. He wasn't really into making titles for a lot of his music. But there is a connection between a piece of art, which we've seen previously, with an actual song development, the idea of Lemonade. Is he revisiting that idea? Is he kind of fixating on that and considering that while he's generating a work of art? Or is he perhaps generating a work of art and recalling specific ideas? I don't really know. We have mentioned, of course, the many fruit references from Apples and Oranges, that song, to here, Lemonade. And even in a song like Scrunching on All Fours or something like that. I can't remember exactly what the lyrics were. I believe that was in Apples and Oranges. So, at any rate, there have been a number of references to fruit by Mr. Barrett. Now, I will also point you here to a number of coincidences, I guess you could say, on page 216 to give a sampling of kind of something interesting about Mr. Barrett. He has within his collection of artwork, which is kind of pieced together, a number of, I guess you could say, images or artwork doodlings that seem entirely random. And you can look at these and see so many things that are, as a Pink Floyd fan or as a Syd Barrett fan, quite significant. There's a sun, of course, we just mentioned the sun, not too big a deal. There's a fish or two fishes that appear to be bumping noses, very much like the song Terrapin. There's a cat that's jumping, a psychedelic mushroom. There is a gnome with music next to him. Quite interesting, isn't it? And of course, there's also a cow, a large cow. So, all quite interesting images, or images of note, perhaps, to Mr. Barrett. Now, this may seem arbitrary to you, but as noted in on page 138 and 139 of the same book, there are letters written to a specific person, and the authors of this book note that there's a Victorian lady, a very proper kind of a Victorian lady, which eventually was made into another work of art by Mr. Barrett. But there also is in writing next to it, "At Jesus Green." Now, that is significant to me because that is a specific mention of the green, or Jesus Green, which of course is going to tie in. And they note within the book here that, of course, that is very likely a note of a meeting with a certain person. And we, in Did Syd Dark Side of the Moon, we mentioned the idea of the scarecrow meeting a certain young lady on the green or in the grass, which is, of course, the scarecrow meeting in a field of corn. And that would be on the Jesus Green. And of course, the imagery of Jesus is tied up in the scarecrow because he is hung up in the air, which could very easily be considered to be hanging up of Jesus on a cross. So that would be perhaps the Jesus Green. Very, very odd ways of communicating, tying together all these ideas and considering them. But, I mean, it does appear that Mr. Barrett has a very odd way of loosely connecting ideas in his own mind. And while that may be considered to be sloppy to some people, that doesn't mean that it's incoherent necessarily. It just means that it's very loose and difficult to understand, in my opinion. So, gone through quite a few things here. I guess I will say one last thing here. I'll go through a couple of notes that I have from Mr. Chapman's book, A Very Irregular Head. So I've, just give me a moment to kind of pull these kind of thoughts together. The first one that I kind of like to point out, I guess you could say I would like to point out, is on page 399 is the note by Mr. Chapman of Still Life with Lemons, painted in January of 2006. And apparently that Mr. Barrett had signed. So I'm not sure, perhaps that's referencing another painting of lemons that Mr. Barrett made. Now, he doesn't mention what kind of a painting this is. I know from the Barrett book that it's a watercolor, but here it's not being mentioned whether or not it's an oil painting or watercolor. So I'm not sure if that's the same. It would be very interesting to see that and see if perhaps there's, I guess you could say, some kind of, I don't know, some kind of connection between that and this song Lemonade. Okay, page 291 of the same book. Mr. Jenner is kind of recalling the very last sessions that he had with Mr. Barrett, and that those were quite disappointing, and that they were a little bit sloppy, and that Mr. Barrett didn't really seem to be able to emerge from a kind of a fog that he was in for some reason. This, of course, would be caused by any number of reasons, or could be caused by any number of factors, which could include, of course, a mental stability or drug abuse, or perhaps just being down. I will point out, of course, that with Mr. Barrett, as we mentioned, if he is doing these types of things on purpose, which in my opinion is quite possible, they do mention that Mr. Barrett wouldn't let anyone see lyrics. And so after a while, they just kind of thought maybe there weren't any or something. But I will point out that it may be that he is specifically communicating with what he has played. I haven't gone through all of this yet, but I do have kind of a hint about something, and I'll get into that later. And again, I'm going to continue on with my Did Syd series over time, but I do wonder if he wasn't being specifically quiet, and this seems odd, I'll grant you it seems odd, but I do wonder this, if Mr. Barrett wasn't being specifically obvious, what's the word? If he wasn't being handling things in a roundabout way, deliberately deceitful, in order to kind of disguise what he was doing so that people would have to try and figure it out, which I think in a way he is known to do. We've discussed the joke of Have You Got It Yet, the song itself, and how perhaps he very much enjoys kind of playing these kinds of deliberate jokes that are twists on things with people, and then I guess you could say seeing whether or not they can figure it out, how long it takes them to figure it out, and then having a little bit of a laugh, I guess, at the whole interaction. And I suppose that's about it for my thoughts on that. Okay, so that's enough, I guess. I'll just finish off with one last thing. This will be the last thing that I'll do before I run through and do my final episode of conclusions. And I'm also going to do my basic conclusions where I run through the counts. Let's do the count real quick, okay? Let's do the count of all of our themes of Mr. Barrett. I'll throw it up on the screen here for you. This is what I ended up with from a review of his work. Number 1, male-female inversion or comparison. I have 8 examples. Sexual metaphor and innuendo I have by 12. Oh no, that's a 13. Sorry, 13. King, Queen, Royal references I have by 6. Young and animal metaphors I have by 16. Shy, dismissive, or misogynistic tone I have by 7. Lost, love, torn attraction I have by 22. Changing religious or esoteric beliefs I have by 11. Alienation, separation I have by 12. Drug, psychedelic use or references I have by 11. Colors and painting I have by 17. Travel and flying I have by 11. Hidden relations and sorrow I have by 15. Sun, stars, planet references I have by 9. Low-high art combinations I have by 6. Literature, Joyce, Tolkien, Shakespeare references I have by 10. Looks like a 10. Planning I have by 5. Science I have by 2. Abbreviations and nicknames I have by 6. Dylan, Velvet Underground and Doors references I have by 6. And the last one is childhood references I have by 8. Those are the final numbers for the themes that seem to be consistent throughout Mr. Barrett's music. I will discuss those in conclusions, which will be the next and last episode of this series. So the last thing I would like to end with is a kind of a poem by Mr. Keats. It's much longer than this. I'm just going to run through Book 1, lines 1 through 24 of Endymion. And I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. So please bear with me while I read this at you. Please consider the nature of this. Here is a poem from someone whose name was writ in water, which is similar to perhaps Mr. Barrett's concept of writing a name like a ghost. In other words, creating and then just disappearing from this world. And you have to wonder, how can you know or understand the totality of someone who has decided to write their name like a ghost? Perhaps he's done that, and the only way to do that is by tracking his influences. But again, that's what we're trying to do in the other episode. So, without further ado, here is the lines 1 through 24 of John Keats' somewhat famous poem, I guess you could say. And I would like you to consider the implications of not only upon Mr. Barrett, but also perhaps upon your own life. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness, but still will keep a warm bower quiet for us, and a sleep full of sweet dreams and health and quiet breathing. Therefore on every morrow are we wreathing a flowery band to bind us to the earth, spite of despondence, of the human dearth of noble natures, of the gloomy days, of all the unhealthy and o'er-darkened ways made for our searching. Yes, in spite of all, some shape of beauty moves away the pall from our dark spirits. Such the sun, the moon, trees, old and young, sprouting a shady boon for simple sheep, and such are daffodils with the green world they live in, and clear rills that for themselves a cooling covert make against the hot season, the mid-forest brake, rich with a sprinkling of fair musk-rose blooms. And such too is the grandeur of the dooms we have imagined for the mighty dead. All lovely tales that we have heard or read, an endless fountain of immortal drink, pouring unto us from the heavens' brink. That's pretty much it. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will talk to you later.